Welcome to the Lewis and Rozh Hockey Podcast. I'm Lewis,
And I'm Roche.
and today we have on very special guest Andrew Berkshire. He is the program director of Game Over on STPN Sports and host of Game Over Montreal. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here. It's fun to be able to get this done. Always fun to join a show from the UK. I think like the second or third time I've ever done that in my whole career. So nice to meet you guys.
It's really nice to meet you too, Andrew. I've been messaging you for years on Twitter. It's finally nice to be able to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you.
This is the best hockey podcast from the UK, 100%.
Define best.
What do you mean define best? We're the only one. So, by very fact, we're also the worst.
I can give you that.
Cool. Let's start off with the first topic of today. Game 2 of Vegas versus Florida last night. Vegas with a dominant 7-2 win over the Panthers. I give them a cup now, man. There's no point. Don't let them play out the rest of the series.
It does seem that way, right? You know what this reminds me of a little bit is 2021 when the Montreal Canadiens made it to the Stanley Cup final, and Carey Price was carrying them through those first three rounds, and Sergei Bobrovsky did that for the Florida Panthers. The Panthers have been more dominant in terms of wins and losses than the Canadiens were that year. They've only lost up until this series. They had lost one game in 12, right? They were 11-1 after Game 4 against Boston. But Sergei Bobrovsky's performance, just anytime a player is that far off of what they've been able to do the last several years, it can't last forever. And with that big break between the conference final and the Stanley Cup final for Florida, to me, it just spelled doom. Because a guy like that, you want to keep him playing all the time, keep him in that zone. And as soon as Game 1 happened and Bobrovsky looked okay at best, doesn't look great. I assume that the rest of the series will be a little bit tighter than the first two games, but it's not looking good for Florida.
The Florida loss in Game 1, which I believe was 5-2, it was their biggest loss by margin since Game 4 versus Boston. The only other loss they had received was versus the Leafs. Woo!
I won solace in life.
Yeah, and then they lost even bigger last night, right? Like the 7-2 was that's a rough one. A really rough third period where you can't really muster much. You get the two goals, but at the same time you're giving three up. Like they just don't seem to be able to match up with the Golden Knights' depth. And Aiden Hill has been really good, which is kind of an unknown goalie, stealing the spotlight in the playoffs. And Sergei Bobrovsky has not been as good as they've expected, so it's been tough for Florida. And the other thing that I've noticed is the Florida Panthers were the most penalized team in the regular season in the entire league. And then in the playoffs, they actually took fewer penalties per minute than they did in the regular season. They're the only team in the playoffs. Everybody else was taking more. And now all of a sudden that discipline is completely gone. Like the penalty list for the last two games is absurd. They've completely lost their composure. So that plus Bobrovsky, like they look cooked.
It doesn't help as well that your star player is the one being penalised the most. If you had some bum on the fourth line who's taking that many penalty minutes, you can't really you can't make it make sense, but you can sort of understand. But when you got Matthew Tkachuk out there, he's not even played half the game last night, I don't think, because he was out for so long in the penalty box or in the locker room because he took a 10-minute misconduct.
I think it was 2, right? He took 2.
Yeah, he took two 10-minute misconducts. Like, he has been such a driving force for the Panthers in the playoffs. I think he's their leading point scorer. He's being able to come up in the clutch moments. If he's out there taking ridiculous penalties for that long a time as well, you can't be doing that, man. And I think you're right. The discipline that they've shown is just crumbling.
6 game misconducts. Or not game misconducts, but like misconducts, 10-minute misconducts in one game. I know Vegas took them too, right? But obviously Vegas as the winning team is not going to be the instigators, right? It's the Panthers trying to do that very hockey thing where it's like, oh, we got to show them that we got more fight in us, but you end up taking it too far. I'm honestly shocked because of the Stanley Cup final. Less shocked, but if you take 2 misconducts in the same game, it's got to be a suspension. I mean, the league's suspension system, the NHL player safety is a joke, so there won't be. But 2 misconducts in one game, to me, that's an automatic 1-game suspension, no matter what time of year it is. Tkachuk, throughout most of the playoffs, I think has been very smart in how he's applied himself physically. And now, as the Panthers are falling apart, he's losing it with the rest of them, which is the worst news for them possible. But he's not the only one, obviously. 4 other guys taking misconducts in that same game, so it's a rough situation for Florida. I always try to look at the possibilities of like what can change where this series can, flip the script a little bit. And, if everything were to turn Florida's way in terms of discipline and goaltending, of course, but what's the catalyst for that to happen? And I don't think we saw it last night in this series. I don't think we're in a situation where we're almost tipping the scales towards Florida. It's very, very heavily in Vegas's corner right now. So originally I thought Florida would come back and kind of push, like before game 2, Florida would win game 3, but they would be down 2-1 after the Vegas games. Now I don't know if they can muster a win until game 4. They just looked defeated.
I don't.
Go on,
You go.
Rush. No, you go on, Rush.
I don't know if you saw this. On Twitter, there was a clip of Colasar, I think, going around saying, like they don't have, not like in terms of winning, but in terms of fighting, they're saying they don't have it in them. Like they're keeping the gloves on, and even then, like we saw at the end of the game, there was maybe 11 guys left on the Panthers bench.
That was funny. That was worse than New Jersey, New York. Did you see that in the last face-off of the game, Paul Maurice put out 5 defensemen?
Yeah, defensive style, Sounds like one of your face-offs.
What do you mean?
Not a good coach, but I'm sorry.
I wasn't allowed to coach.
I wonder why.
The Panthers' run throughout the playoffs reminds me a little bit of what the Flyers did earlier on this season when John Tortorella came in. Because for the first, I think, 20 games, they were in a playoff spot, and it was almost as if he was squeezing every single drop of what the Flyers had, and obviously they fell off massively as the season went on. It almost seems like Paul Maurice is just squeezing the Panthers so hard and getting everything out, and they just don't have anything left.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way, and I think that's a great point, because that's the thing. Like, teams get hot, right? Sometimes it's at the wrong time, sometimes it's at the right time. And the Florida Panthers throughout most of the regular season were, like, if you look at the underlying numbers, what they were doing, it were like taking apart goals and looking at what plays produce goals. They were a better team than what their standings position said they should be, right? It's why in the first round I put money on the Florida Panthers to beat the Boston Bruins, and I was so mad after Game 4. I actually tweeted, because last year in the playoffs, I watched all of Florida's games because it's kind of excited. Team on the rise. They look like they're finally contenders. They win the President's Trophy. And against Washington, I thought they were abysmal. The only reason they won that series is because Washington was too old and done, and frankly, didn't have it anymore. Right? Like their fastball is gone. And then in the second round, I was like, well, maybe they'll wake up against the Lightning. It's their, cross-state rivals. And the Lightning beat them even worse than they had the previous year when the Lightning were not as good.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is the worst playoff team I've ever seen. And then after that, they went 11-1. But, sometimes it just happens. Things click into place for a team. I think they got some very, very beneficial officiating. Whether, like, I don't think that's directed. I think it just happens sometimes where you get a stretch where officials let things go that you don't usually get away with. Guys like Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, guys like Radko Gudas pulling moves that would end up in minors in most situations. But they got that going for them. Their guys started scoring really well. Sergei Bobrovsky found the fountain of youth for a stretch. But those streaks never last forever. And when they do end, it's like the team is gasping for air. right? It's similar so much to the 2021 Montreal Canadiens run where they made that Stanley Cup final and against Tampa. Those first couple of games, it looked like the whole team had already played a game earlier that day
Yeah.
when they got to the game. Like they were just trying to breathe and getting nothing. Like they all had asthma all of a sudden, right? And that's what I'm seeing with Florida here. They're not completely blown out of the water in terms of like the total scoring chances or total shots in the game, but in terms of controlling the game, they don't have any. Like Vegas is kind of playing with their food.
It doesn't. When you look at the teams on the ice, and you would have said that was a regular season game. If you gave that to a random person off the street who'd never seen hockey before, and you said this is a regular season game, you would have thought that the Florida Panthers were a last place team facing the best team in the league. And the fact that this is the finals just makes it even more bizarre. It's sort of like the Colorado Florida finals in 1996. I wasn't alive to see that, so I'm not sure what the direct comparison would be. It just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, I was alive for that. I was quite young. 96, I would have been 9. Like I remember that final a little bit. I mostly remember, honestly, how dominant the goaltending was. That was like the only reason that series even looked competitive was Patrick Waugh and John Van Beesbrook were just incredible. But Colorado obviously was a high-end contending team, and the Florida Panthers were a Cinderella team. I wouldn't call the Panthers a Cinderella team this year, even though they were an 8th place finisher in the regular season, just because their underlying numbers were so strong. And Vegas, they were a very strong team as well. I believe they won the West, but like under the underlying numbers, the teams were relatively even coming into this series. But Vegas also, I think, had a much easier route here. Like that also is a factor. Going through the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Leafs get a bad rap, and I love to make fun of the Leafs because it's extremely funny, and their fans usually take it well, and like they joke around back and forth. It's usually a good time, but the Leafs, they're an easier team to play against than say Boston or Carolina, but they're still not easy. They got a lot more physical the last couple of years. And as much as Florida won those games, like you're still taking hits. You're getting hurt in winning those games. And man, Carolina especially, I think they're just a buzzsaw. Like their forecheck is so
Yeah.
relentless. Even with the break, it just might not have been like the combination of having the break and losing the momentum that they had, but not enough of a break to fully heal. I think they're just more beat up than the Golden Knights are too.
But that's quite interesting as well because they swept the Hurricanes, whereas the series between Dallas and Vegas went to 6, I believe. So like even with that extended rest period, they still haven't managed to heal up, and you can see that as well with Radko Gudas being injured last night. They went to 11-7. He went down in I think in the first 10 minutes with a hit from Marsh or so. I don't know
I mean,
exactly
if
who it was.
Marchessault is injuring Gudis, the series is not going well for the Florida Panthers.
I think going 11-7 last night was a bad idea. Because
Well, he just wasn't going to play, was he? And then he changed his mind, right? Or
yeah,
was he
well,
always?
it looked like it in warm-ups that you went off the ice in the middle of the warm-ups. They were talking, like on the feed, it looked like they were talking to Casey Fitzgerald and going, "You're gonna go in," and then he went in, but also Radko Gudas was there, and then he got knocked out. I'm pretty sure. Um, and also the Panthers haven't gone 11-7 throughout the playoffs. I don't remember going 11-7 in the regular season either. It feels just like an uneducated move there by Paul Maurice to try and inject some energy into the lineup, and it's just not working.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I hate to keep on bringing it back to Montreal, but I feel like the parallels are so stark. Like Paul Maurice is getting a lot of credit right now. I just don't think he's a very good coach. Like you look at what he did with Winnipeg, and the moment Winnipeg had like moderate weaknesses, everything fell apart. Like they were a very strong team back in like 2017, 2016, 2017.
That
And then
2018 run was crazy.
yeah,
They
and
should have
then
made it.
they lose Dustin Byfuglien, which is, a huge loss to get around. They lose Tobias Enstrom the year before, and their numbers their underlying numbers just tank, right? They're no longer dominating play. They're getting goals because they have a lot of talent, but they're not producing consistent plays that create those goals in a way that's sustainable, right? It's just they're relying on the skill of their forwards more than anything, and that can work for stretches, and then it gets dicey. They're not doing the proper process to play successful hockey. And then, they lose Byfuglien, everything falls apart completely. They lose Trouba, and then like all of a sudden Josh Morrissey, who was a promising young player, he's bad, for several years. He's really, really bad. Then they bring in Rick Bowness. Josh Morrissey's in the Norris conversation. Like there's one change, all of a sudden they're much, much better, right? And Dom Ducharme, when he was in charge in Montreal, not a good coach. Players didn't like him. Players didn't really listen to him. Led them to the most pathetic streak the following year in probably the franchise's entire history. Part of that is on Marc Bergevin as well, but just the change from a veteran-laden team kind of playing their own game to get to the right spot, and then all the praise being heaped on the coach. I think oftentimes coaches can be a hindrance more than a help. There's some really good coaches out there. There's probably things that Paul Maurice specifically is very good at. Maybe he's a good pregame speech guy, but people look back at the Panthers, run towards the playoffs, and I keep on seeing gifs of him like screaming at them at the bench in some game, and like after that game, things turned around. I'll tell you when things turned around for the Florida Panthers. They were in Toronto, and Keith Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk's dad, went on Toronto radio, and he called them soft. And for the rest of the season, they were much, much better, much more physical. It's like getting that media pressure of Toronto, which Florida never gets, and then your own dad, one of the best player on the team, your dad goes on the radio and calls you soft. You're gonna play harder from then on. It wasn't Paul Maurice. Like honestly, Keith Tkachuk might be more important to the Florida Panthers than Paul Maurice.
Would you replace Keith Tkachuk as the head coach? Sorry, would you replace Paul Maurice with Keith Tkachuk as head coach?
Well, he's got no head coaching experience, so probably not. But maybe, honestly, get him a couple good assistants.
Make him make his speech.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. There's kind of different kinds of coaches in the league, right? There's guys who their specialty is just getting players pumped up, and then the assistant coaches do all the X's and O's. You're not the guy who's doing the adjustments during the game. You're the guy who's finding a way to get a specific player or the team as a whole fired up, playing their absolute best. Because it's a long season. It's hard for these guys to put in that oft quoted 110% every single game. You've got to find a way to drag that out of them. As much as they're getting paid millions of dollars and they're professional athletes, like nobody does their best work at work every day. So there's that kind of coach, and then there's the guy who's like the tactician. And sometimes there's guys who think they're tacticians and they're really not. And that's guys like Dom Ducharme. And I have a feeling that Paul Maurice is a little bit in that boat as well, where he thinks he's, God's gift to coaching because he's been in it forever. He used to be the youngest coach in the history of the NHL when he first started in, I believe, Hartford. And now he's been in it for, 30-something years. At a certain point, I wonder what he's bringing this new to the table. And maybe he's just a rah guy. Maybe he's good at that. But in terms of solving problems, I don't think he's the guy.
When I'm looking at Paul Maurice, especially last game on the bench when he was abusing the officials, I like you can see that his lineup choices and the way he's choosing to coach. I don't think you can say he's getting out-coached by Bruce Cassidy. He's just not as good. I'm not sure. I think there is a distinct difference because you saw with Sheldon Keefe and Paul Maurice the way he was deploying his guys versus Toronto. It was very clearly him out-coaching Keefe. It feels like Bruce Cassidy's just the better guy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's one guy's strategies are just better, and it's not like he's having to adjust and he's out adjusting the other guy. It's just Maurice is unable to figure out what to do against Cassidy. So it's not like a chess match where one guy moves his rook one way and the other guy's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to move my bishop this way. And he's countering him more effectively. It's just Bruce Cassidy doesn't have to adjust much because Maurice isn't able to match his initial game plan, which again is a mark of not very good coach for Paul Maurice. But Bruce Cassidy is a very good coach. I mean, we saw what he did in Boston for a good stretch there as well. And I think that there's probably a bit of a chip on his shoulder, getting fired last summer in Boston, and then Boston having the best regular season of all time, and then all of a sudden going out in the first round to this team. So beating Florida probably means something to him as well, where it's like, not only am I going way further in the playoffs than the team who fired me, I'm beating the team that beat them. So there's that extra money on the board. Like, there's so many storylines in this series. It's honestly shocking how much there is between these two teams because they're so different, right? But Riley Smith and Jonathan Marchessault, they were basically tossed away by Florida in the expansion draft that became the Vegas Golden Knights, right? Marchessault could be the Conn Smythe winner this year. He's going to do it against the team that decided he wasn't good enough to protect in the expansion draft. That's insane. It's a crazy story.
I know Smith was traded, I think.
Yeah, he was traded so that they would take Marchessault.
Wait, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was to protect a defenseman. I think it was like Alec Petrovich or something like that. Like he's a good
that's
player.
a blast from the past.
Yeah, I think it was Alec Petrovich, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So I'll just say allegedly, as we talked about before the show. But it was that first expansion draft where GMs just lost their minds and they didn't understand that at the end of the day, you're only going to lose one player unless you shoot yourself in the foot like Florida. And I believe they actually traded another player to Vegas in that expansion draft as well. So they lost 3 players, and 2 of them became 2/3 of the top line in Vegas that year when they immediately went to the Stanley Cup final. It was Riley Smith, Jonathan Marchessault, and William Karlsson was the third in that trio.
William Karlsson was on the Panthers?
No. He wasn't the one that went from the Panthers.
He was just it was on the top line. Okay.
Yeah, he was the other one on the top line. I don't remember if there was a third player coming from Florida to the Vegas Golden Knights, but I think there was.
Find if that was one. But
yeah, not as important as the other two, clearly, but Florida was one of the teams that really did the worst in that expansion draft. So, like, honestly, good for them that they're at the point where they can make a Stanley Cup final and win a President's Trophy last season as well. I don't want to just dog on Florida, but it's such a great story for Vegas to beat this particular team.
And seeing the guys that went to the final in their first season being able to come back with an arguably a better team, and I don't think we're going to see Florida win the cup. I'll be honest.
No, I don't think so either.
I think they're done.
And the irony is like that both these teams were pretty wildly outplayed in their most recent series. Like the Vegas Golden Knights were outplayed by the Dallas Stars. It's just Dallas.
Do you think?
Oh yeah. Just they were wildly undisciplined, and for whatever reason, they couldn't win with Jamie Benn in the lineup, which is extremely fun.
See, I would have said that they outplayed Dallas. From my perspective on it, I'm not as educated in the world of hockey as you are, Andrew. But
no, I mean the biggest difference in that series, honestly, is that Jake Ottinger was not very good.
He was terrible.
They were very close in terms of scoring chances, in terms of high danger scoring chances. Pucks moving through the slot before shots, all that kind of stuff. But Dallas was significantly better on special teams, and Jake Ottinger couldn't stop anything, which is crazy because he's so good, and he just had a rough playoff this year. And Aiden Hill came out of nowhere, and man, he's been spectacular. Can't take anything away from him.
He's been excellent, way beyond anyone's expectations, I think.
Yep.
When I look at the playoffs between Tampa and Montreal in 2021, Tampa won in 5, and I have said, I can't remember if I said it on a podcast or just a Roche, that I believe that Tampa deliberately lost Game 4 so they could go back and win it in Game 5 in Tampa. Do you think that's true, and do you think the Vegas Golden Knights do that?
I don't think that ever happens. No, I think no matter how control you feel in a series, hockey is so random and so uncontrollable that if you were to do that, it's one of those things where people talk about the hockey gods, right? It's
Yeah.
like a common parlance. If you were to lose on purpose, the hockey gods would get you, and it would end up being some sort of crazy reverse sweep, right? And I just don't think, even up 3-0, I don't think any team would ever lose on purpose. And remember that game against that Game 4 in Montreal went to overtime as well. It was
Yes.
Josh Anderson scoring in overtime. So I don't think you go to overtime if you want to lose on purpose. I think the main difference between the first couple games and the last couple games in Tampa is those first few games. Tampa was able to get to Carey Price, and they were able to get him moving and expose him in a way that no other team in that Stanley Cup run was able to do. Vegas wasn't able to do it. Winnipeg couldn't do anything. They got destroyed in that series, and Toronto wasn't able to do it. Maybe in like Game 2, I think they were able to get there. Maybe it was Game 3, but I think they won like 5 or 6-1, something like that.
Yeah.
But Tampa was able to do that, and then Montreal finally started to wake up and play defensive hockey, and the rest of that series was extremely low scoring. And the difference was just like the Tampa Bay Lightning had way more offensive depth than the Canadians did, so they were able to squeak a couple extra goals at important times through, and they won the final, like 2 of the final 3 games there, which were far more tight.
I think Game 5 was a 1-0 win.
Yes, it was. Yep.
Ross Colton.
Or did they score an empty net goal? I don't remember, but yeah, it was a shutout from Andrei Vasilevsky, that's for sure.
Love that guy. I suggested on Twitter the other day that there could be a potential trade package trading Mana to Tampa for Vasilevsky, and I got some very angry comments.
From Tampa Bay Lightning fans or from Lightning
Leafs
fans?
They were going. I can read you the the comments because they were pretty harsh. I got one guy saying, "Dog, you couldn't get either of those guys for Mitchie regular season." And the other guy said, "No way, Vasilevsky had a brutal year."
Whoa.
Did
Like,
he?
he's Andrei Vasilevsky. He's the best goalie in the world. I think there was a guy asking whether you would trade Mana for an elite goalie because they were talking about Hellebuck, and I said, if you can trade Mana for someone like Shesterkin or Vasilevsky, would you? I would. I'd go yeah.
I'd think about it for a couple of reasons. Number one is Marner's only got 2 years left on his deal.
Yeah.
Number two, like if I'm Tampa Bay, I'd also think about it because they are a team that wants to win again. Now Vasilevsky's part of their core, right? So it's kind of tough to convince them to move a piece that big. I don't know how many years he has left on his contract. Actually,
5, I believe.
before. 5. Okay, so he's 28, signed until he's 33. That's not bad. I think that's a decent, interesting thing for Toronto. I think for Toronto, the most important thing is they're not going to be taking any money back, so they'd actually save a little bit more than $1 million a year, where they can spend somewhere else. Tampa Bay, it'd be tough for them cap-wise to fit in Mitch Marner, but for anybody from the Lightning side of things, they'd be saying, "Oh, like, why would they ever want a playoff non-performer like Mitch Marner?" Mitch Marner in Toronto is on the top line, has to be with Matthews. He's the guy. On Tampa, he doesn't have to be the guy.
They got Braden
Nikita
Point.
Kucherov's the guy. Braden Point's the guy. Steven Stamkos is the guy. On Tampa, he's the secondary scoring. He would be free in a way that he's never been before. I think it would make their offense essentially unstoppable.
Yeah.
But can you get somebody who can be good enough to replace Vasilevsky and cheap enough? Like that's the big question. And their backup is Brian Elliott. He's not going to do it. So I guess it really depends on what they think they have in the system or what they think they could find on the open market. But it's a really intriguing trade to me because it solves a problem for Toronto, which is consistent goaltending. and also gives them value in a Mitch Marner trade, which is likely going to happen, which is going to be hard to get because anytime you're trading a contract that big, it's hard to get back equal value. And this is equal value for sure. And Tampa, I think it gives them that like jolt of energy to get back to a Stanley Cup final right away that maybe that roster needs outside of just having a summer off. I don't know how they were able to do 3 finals in a row in the modern NHL, honestly.
I have no idea either.
Those guys, like this year where they fell apart at the end of the year, I think that team was so physically
Exhausted.
and mentally exhausted. Like I can't imagine. Because remember that first Stanley Cup they won, that happened in August.
Yeah.
It wasn't the June Stanley Cup final we're used to. They had even less time to recover
No,
before
it
the
was
next season.
that first Stanley Cup they won was later than that because I remember going back
Yeah,
to
it
school in
started in August.
September and
Yep.
looking at the results in the morning when I was in school, and that was the middle of September, I feel.
You're right.
So
You're 100% right.
like even then, that's insane. And also one of the like big energy guys in that team, Corey Perry, also went to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. He also
He
lost
did.
all 3.
He did lose all of them, which couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
Is he a nice guy?
Personally, yes, for sure, but on the ice, no.
Interesting.
So it's definitely very satisfying to watch a guy who has a long reputation for being a dirty, cheap shot artist lose 3 times in a row. That was very fun. But at the same time, I will say for Corey Perry, when he was in Montreal, it was the first time I've watched him like for a full season. And he's a guy who I always hated because he was cheap and a bit of a whiner and would always do that extra dirty shot after the whistle kind of thing. But watching him day in, day out, man, do I ever respect that guy. The hardest worker, just unbelievable team guy. And my takeaway, like my lasting memory from Corey Perry was, I believe it was against the Jets, where he skated basically face first into an elbow from, I believe, Logan Stanley to send a puck across the crease to Eric Stahl for a tap-in goal. It was like he saw this opportunity and he was like, I don't care how much I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to find this goal for my team. And he did it time and time again. I believe he got cut by a skate in that playoff series, like 30, 40 stitches, like crazy, willing to sacrifice a body. So a guy like that playing 3 Stanley Cup finals in a row, he must be falling apart. Like he's stuck together with bubblegum and toothpicks.
He might really relish this time off that he's having now because he doesn't have to play like tough hockey.
100%. And he's also one of the older guys in the league too. Like he's turning 39 soon. Oh no, he just turned 38 last month. So, but still, 38 in the NHL is old.
Mark Giordano is looking like a dinosaur.
He did in the playoffs, didn't he? And he had a great regular season.
Dude,
Sometimes the older guys, sometimes you don't know when the cliff is coming, right? They're gonna fall down the elevator shaft, but you don't know when it's gonna happen, and you don't know how fast it's gonna happen. Are they gonna grab the rope on the way down and kind of just lose a little bit, or are they just gonna lose everything? And it sure looked like in the playoffs, Mark Giordano just fell straight down and couldn't grab onto anything.
I was very much of the opinion that I don't care how much experience he has, I don't care how old he is, that guy should not be in the lineup versus any. Like, it was clear towards the end of the Tampa series that he just didn't quite have it, and then in game 1 and 2 versus Florida, it was clear that he very much didn't have it. I didn't understand that perspective from Keith to keep playing him when you had the option to rest him. Someone like Connor Timmins, who has that really good offensive mind as a defenseman, he would have been really good, I think. Not so great defensively, but he would have been a great injection to the lineup, and they just continue to play this 38-year-old dinosaur. I don't understand it. I think he should have been fired.
It's that kind of decision making that is going to get him fired, right? Because look at the amount of depth that the Leafs have on defense that they prepared for in this run to the playoffs, right? Connor Timmins, Timothy Liljegren also barely played. Eric Gustafsson barely played. You've got the ability to bring these guys in. Like if you think you need Mark Giordano for like 4 minutes a game, you could do 11-7 like the Leafs did so many times this year and just let him sit on the bench most of the
Yeah.
game and throw him in there for when you think this is when we need Mark Giordano's veteran savvy, whatever. But you got to let the kids play. Like, how many years now in Toronto? I know we're getting off topic here talking about the Leafs, but how many years in Toronto have we been waiting for Timothy Liljegren and Rasmus Sandin to be full-time NHLers? They're like 24 and 25, and still the coach doesn't trust them to play. Like, they're either good or they're bad. Figure it out, and then figure out if you have to move on. Because I swear, if we enter another season where Leafs fans are like, "Oh, Timothy Liljegren, he's like our quote unquote top defense prospect," like, dude, how old is this guy? He's almost as old as Michael Bunting when he was a rookie there. Like, enough.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
It's a common theme. Like we do this with Keith. They have their guys, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Absolutely.
Paul Giordano, Curtis, I guess if you're a Curtis hater.
Let's not go into the Leafs. We'll be here for hours. Let's instead move on to a different topic. Cole Caufield, as I've seen him being called on Twitter, signed to an 8-year extension yesterday for, I believe, $7.875 million a year. Did I get that number right?
Yeah, $7.85 million a year.
85.
Over the course of the 8-year contract, it's $200,000 total, less than Nick Suzuki. So it kind of gives them twin contracts. It reminds me of the Getzlaf Perry contracts after they won the Stanley Cup in 2007, although less rich based on the salary cap. I mean, these guys haven't accomplished as much. But this is a huge thing that the Montreal Canadiens needed to get done. The price is extremely team friendly
It's
for
incredible.
a guy who, with a bum shoulder, was on pace for like 45 goals this year. Under Marty St. Louis, he's essentially a 50-goal pace guy. Like, the sky is the limit for Cole Caufield in terms of offensive production. Defensively, he has some work to do, but I think there's a lot of people who are slaves to models who look at defensive results and they're like, "Oh, he's not good defensively. He doesn't even know like to go back in his own zone." If you actually watch him play, it's not that he's necessarily terrible defensively or makes bad reads or doesn't try. It's that the entire team is bad defensively, and when you're playing top line matchups all the time and you have no support structure within the team, your defensive numbers are going to be terrible. So I think Caufield's going to end up being like a middling defensive guy and extremely elite offensive guy. There's very few players in the league that when they have the puck on their stick feel inevitable. You know,
Yeah.
guys like Nikita Kucherov, guys like Alex Ovechkin in the right spots now in his prime all the time. You know, guys like Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl. And I'm not putting Caufield on the same level as those guys because they're all out superstars. But when he has the puck on his stick and it's an important situation, you need one goal to tie the game, or it's late in the game and you need a game winner. There are very few players in the league I'd take over Cole Caufield, and I think that says a lot about his value. He's a very unique player, and he's able to do it in a way that I don't think anybody else really does, based on like his size. Like, nobody his size can shoot the puck like him. There's very few people that can shoot the puck like him. Period. But he is an extremely impressive player to watch.
I think in terms of size and production, the most similar comparison would probably be someone like Alex DeBrincat, who is that shorter
Yep.
stature and has that proven goal-scoring record apart from last year when he was god-awful. And I also think it's hard to criticise Caufield defensively when you look at that defence score of the Canadiens.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, a lot of rookies.
I mean, the whole team last year was dreadful.
Yep. They were, and the fact is, like, as bad as they looked, they were worse because Sam
Yeah.
Montembeault was actually incredible last year. They have a long way to go defensively, but at the same time, as someone who watches the team and wants them to succeed, I actually appreciate what Martin St. Louis is doing there because he seems to be working far more on like individual confidence for young players and getting the offense going in a way that's consistent and sustainable before he even thinks about defense. And you're never going to win a championship if your team can't play at the very least like top 12 defense in the league. So they have a long way to go to be a championship quality team. But I think it makes sense with the way the league is going to focus on offense first because that's what's harder to find. any decent assistant coach can get a team to play middling defense.
Yeah.
So getting the offense out of a team that historically back to like the mid 90s has not had a lot of offense, that's what's exciting to me is players who can produce at an elite level. And that's why when it comes to like the draft this year, if they don't take Mitchkoff and he's available, I think there's going to be a lot of upset people.
Is that your guy in the draft?
I think so. I think just based on if you have a chance to draft a potential superstar and you don't, it's not very smart. Like the Canadians have a lot of good prospects, but they don't have any legitimate superstars. And you don't see many teams win without a legitimate offensive superstar. Mitchkoff is that. Like he has the potential to be like a 120-point guy. A guy who can score like 50, 60 goals, who your entire offense runs through. And then you could have Caufield and Suzuki on the second line. Like, come on, that's pretty fun, right? So if they end up taking that defenseman, David Reinbacher, who, you know, everyone says is very good, but isn't a number one defenseman because he's mostly defense only, man, that's just a miss to me.
I have two questions off of that, Andrew, that I'd like to ask you. One regarding Cole Caufield and one regarding the draft. I'll start with the draft one. Looking back at last year's draft, do you think taking Slavkovsky first overall was a mistake?
Well, it's a tough question because I think we know so little about that draft class so far. I think everyone focuses on Logan Cooley and Shane Wright. The guy that I look at as maybe the player that the Canadians should have taken is Simon Nemec.
Yes, yeah.
He's just, they need that elite defenseman, right? And Nemec is that guy. I don't know if there's a guy in this draft, and they're not in a rush to get that guy, but they do need someone there. You know, Lane Hudson could be that guy.
Oh, that guy's insanely good.
Oh my, he is so sickeningly skilled. It's just about whether or not he can adjust to NHL pace and NHL size with how small he is. It's a lot tougher for small defensemen than small forwards, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But the skill and the will is there for him. He's an absolutely incredible player. But if you had him and Simon Nemec, you know, it's a little bit different story. But I think a lot of people are willing to throw in the towel on Slavkovsky. He had a tough year last year. He shouldn't have been in the NHL. I think that was the biggest mistake, was he should have been in the American Hockey League. But you got like guys like David Jiricek in Columbus, phenomenal year in the American Hockey League. He was like the defenseman of the year in the American Hockey League, arguably. I don't know if he won the award or not, but he should have probably won it. You know, Shane Wright had a great year in junior, won the World Juniors gold medal with Canada.
Got swept in the first round of the OHL playoffs.
This is also true, which doesn't look very good for him. Not that it's a one-person game, but doesn't look great. And you got Logan Cooley, amazing year this year in college. None of that's the NHL. So I think a lot of people see gaudy numbers in junior and college and even the AHL, and they say, well, look, that's way better than what Juraj Slavkovsky did in the NHL. It's not, though. Like, to score even 5 goals in the NHL is way harder than scoring 40 in junior. Like, especially at 18 years old. It's just a totally different league in terms of speed and reaction time. And he was also coming over from Europe, where he played his whole career on the big ice, so he was adjusting to that. The speed of reactions along the boards was a big problem for him. I think this year I want to see a big step from him. But one thing to keep in mind with the Montreal Canadiens when they picked him was they didn't necessarily want to take the best player today or next year. They wanted the best player 3 or 4 or 5 years from now.
Yeah.
They see that in Slavkovsky based on his maturity, based on his skill set, based on his frame, all of that. Will they be correct? I don't know. I see some good things with him. I see some things that aren't so good. But the big thing to take away from that year is it just wasn't a very good draft.
It was
in terms of the highest end talent, it wasn't the greatest year. Although the Canadians in the rest of the rounds, like, we don't know, obviously right now it's all like magic beans, but between Lane Hudson and Philip Michar and Owen Beck, like, they really cleaned up. So Slavkovsky has a good amount of runway to figure out himself and become the power forward that the Canadians want him to be. But there's going to be a lot of eyes on him, and I think it's very tough when you start in the NHL right away and you're not ready. It's almost like people get impatient with you and expect you to arrive immediately when, like Owen Beck might make the NHL at 21, 22 years old, and people will be really happy, like, wow, this is a great rookie season from him. And at the same time, Juraj Slafkovsky could be performing better than him, and people will be very disappointed because, he's been around forever.
Yeah.
But he hasn't. He's just a kid. It's like Jesperi Kotkaniemi, right? Had not a huge breakout year offensively, but he had his best career year. And people were like, oh, well, finally he's starting to figure it out in the NHL offensively. The kid's 22. He's just been here since he was 18. A lot of players are breaking in at 22. So you always have to keep that in mind a little bit, I think, with these kinds of players that make it right away that maybe shouldn't have, is they need to be afforded the same amount of patience as players who are developing along more classical development tracks in junior and the American Hockey League and in Europe and in college.
That's a very, very good point there, Andrew. Very good point.
Thank you.
My second question for you is that if Cole Caufield played the entire season without injury, how much more would he be worth?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if it would have changed anything. I think the only thing that could have happened is, his production could have slowed down, and maybe he would have had a little bit less bargaining power. But I think both the organization and his agent know that slowdown would have been because of the shoulder. If he kept scoring consistently, maybe he just makes that extra $200K and is equal to Suzuki. Who knows? But I think if anything, him agreeing with the team to get the surgery midway through the season put him in a better bargaining position, because now they see, okay, this kid is willing to do something he doesn't want to do for the future of himself and the team. He's mature enough to make that choice. Because if you remember at the time when he was taken out of it, like, he was not happy about it.
Yeah.
He could still play, and he felt he could continue to play the rest of the season. But for the Montreal Canadiens, like, we're not winning anything. Cole, like, what if it gets worse? Just take the surgery, be ready for next year when we're going to be a little bit better. Why would you play right now? And he's like, because I want to play. I'm a professional athlete. I'm a maniac. All these guys want to play. They want to play through everything. But I think him doing the mature decision alongside his agent, I think that helped him more than anything.
There was that the joke mid-season that Kent Hughes used to come into the locker room and ask if any players needed surgery so they could put all players on LTIR, which I thought was quite funny.
When they were like 500 early in the season, like 20-something games in, and he just goes in there with a crowbar. Who's feeling good?
Like, I'm a big fan of what the Canadians are doing, and I know as a Leafs fan, I should consider them my mortal enemies. But I'm a big fan of what they're doing. I think Slafkovsky has the ability to become. I said to Rozh a couple of months ago when I think we were talking about Slafkovsky, and I said even if he was, no matter. Let me rephrase. The fact he was taken first overall, I don't think plays any bearing on the rest of his career, because if you look at that draft class, the highlights that are in it, they're still pretty mid highlights when you look at other high picks in the draft. I would consider him a max 70-point player. I think that's his ceiling. I don't think he has. Looking at his play before he got injured and understanding the adjustment that he has and also the team that he was playing on, I don't think he has that ceiling to become world beater status. Someone like Matthews, McDavid, Draisaitl.
No. I think if pie in the sky, everything goes as well as it possibly could with Slafkovsky, like, I don't think this is even possible, but like, the best that he could possibly be would be like a Mikko Rantanen type.
Yeah.
And even then, that's such a high bar. Like, maybe before this season, saying that, it would have made more sense. But Mikko Rantanen this year, when McKinnon was out, and he was like, fine, I will just score every single goal then. We're like, nobody else needs to score but me. he was nuts. I think you're right. If Slavkovsky turns into like a 35 goal, 35 assist power winger, nobody in Montreal is going to be upset. I think they're going to be very, very, very pleased with that. And if anything, this slow start to his career is going to make his next contract cheaper. So that might actually benefit them as well. And you look at other like big guys like him. Like people forget that Slavkovsky, when he came into the league this year, was tied with, I believe it was either Radko Gudas or somebody else, as the heaviest player in the league. It was like him, Gudas, and like Ovechkin were like the top 3 heaviest guys in the league. And he didn't really look like that during the regular season because a lot of those big, tall guys, they're big, but it's like the difference between teenager muscle and adult muscle, right?
Yeah.
It's just a little different. Not understanding how strong you actually need to be in the league. I have a feeling that in the next couple of years, he'll have a lean out portion of time, and then he's going to bulk up again. And when he bulks up again, that's when he's going to truly break out. And you look at other big guys around the league who develop into that power forward prototype. You think of guys like Todd Bertuzzi. Todd Bertuzzi had his breakout year at 24.
Yeah.
That's a long ways away.
Well, it's
so
5
who
years
knows
ago,
what
so
the
young.
future has in store for Slavkovsky, but I don't think next season we want to see progress, but it doesn't need to be make or break.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you, Andrew.
Perfect. Love to hear that.
Rozh's one of Rozh's favourite players. I know Rozh hasn't talked a lot this episode, and he never does, despite my persistent.
I'm just mesmerized in the moment,
One of Rozh's favourite players is Brendan Gallagher. Do you want to give Andrew your hot take, Rozh?
It's not a hot take. It's a factual statement that he should have been the captain after Shea Weber was put on LTIR.
I see a lot of people with that take. I'll say this. I think on the ice, Brendan Gallagher plays in a way that you want other players to emulate, right? He bleeds for the crest. He plays harder than almost anybody else in the league. But off the ice, I'm not so sure he's as big of a leader as people believe. I think he's a bit more, I don't want to say selfish, but he's not like a guy who's talking to young players and being a big mentor necessarily. And this is just what I hear. I'm not in the room. I think Nick Suzuki is an incredible leader, and what he's been able to do the last couple of years with essentially no support structure, I think it means a lot to the team. The fact that he always manages to stay healthy. I think he's the only guy in the NHL who never caught COVID. Like, didn't even catch it in the offseason. Nick Suzuki is like the only person I've heard of that has not caught COVID.
Phil Kessel.
Is Phil Kessel not? Well, of course, Phil Kessel. He's the guy who can't miss a game, right? He's never caught it either. But Cole Caufield caught it in college before he came out to Montreal in 2020. But Suzuki just never misses a game. He's so consistent. He's so calm. But what sold Suzuki as the captain for me was during that terrible year, the first year after the Stanley Cup final, 2021-22, I guess. There was a game against the Edmonton Oilers, and I believe it was in Edmonton, and he scored this spectacular snipe on the power play. And the Oilers coach called the referee over, and like 40 seconds before that, there was an offside, and they called it back. It was like one of those dumb things that the NHL happens to do. And, I think most players get like pissed off, and it you lose composure, and the rest of that power play ends up being a mess. Nick Suzuki, literally like 12 seconds after the next face-off, scores the exact same goal. He's like, "You're going to take it away? I don't give a crap. I'm doing the exact same thing again, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." And I was like, he's captain. That's the guy. It's that attitude of like, you cannot stop me. I'm doing this right now. And that's the kind of stuff that I love to see from leaders on teams. It reminded me of like Joe Sakic, who's not the biggest, like, loud, boisterous guy. He's not the guy who's battling in front of the net necessarily. But Joe Sakic, when things needed to get done, they got done. And that's kind of what I see in Nick Suzuki. So that's why I think he's the captain. But I have to say, I do love Brendan Gallagher. And, man, he's had a rough couple of years. I feel awful for him because a lot of it is just really bad luck, and the injuries that he had carried over from the Stanley Cup final. He had that short summer and wasn't able to rehab, wasn't able to get in shape. And then last year, he finally is able to be healthy entering training camp and immediately blows his groin. Immediately. Like, it's terrible. And if there's anybody who needs to be able to like use that groin area to cut back and forth quickly along the boards, it's Brendan Gallagher. That's his game, right? Is that hard forecheck, protecting the puck along the boards, using his low center of gravity. All of a sudden, you have a tear in your groin. You can't use your low center of gravity. You just get tossed around constantly. And he's never had a great shot. So unless he can get to the areas that require him to play the way he plays, he doesn't score a lot. I'm hoping he has a bounce back year this year, just personally, because he's been such a trooper for this organization. It would suck to see if the last 2 years are all that he can muster going forward. I'd love to see a return to a productive Brendan Gallagher. He doesn't need to score 30, but if he can score 15 to 20, I think everyone would be pretty pleased.
Yeah, no, especially.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, you go, Rush.
No, especially with the the game he's played, like through his whole career, like always battling the corners, always giving. He's been like the heart and soul of this team. I too hope he can bounce back, just because I don't want him to flame out, like we've seen with Trice, with Weber.
Yeah.
Because it would be an absolute shame. But in terms of like people who could maybe step up and fill the gap that those sort of players are leaving, are there any like Habs prospects you're excited for, that you could see maybe being exciting this season?
Yeah, actually, there's tons. This season might be a bit quick for a lot of them. I think the Canadians are going to be a little bit more patient than they have been in recent years with prospects. They have a good development team now. They're about to have a huge influx of talent into Laval, their American Hockey League team, with Joshua Waugh, Riley Kidney, and I believe a couple of others as well. But for this coming year, I think Sean Farrell is a guy that I've got my eye on. He's just so smart with the puck. I think I looked at in the World Championships this year. He played a lot with Lane Hudson,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the two of them are both like very cerebral players. And man, did they ever click! Like the two of them were incredible, bouncing plays off of each other. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm ready to see that in Montreal in a couple of years.
That
I
first
think
goal he scored last year, his first NHL goal, that was
it was
terrible.
ugly.
It was so bad.
It was the worst first goal, but I mean, I think he wasn't ready for the NHL last year. We'll see if he is this year. I think he starts the year in the American Hockey League, but I'm looking at him as like a guy in the second half who steps in and maybe surprises some folks. Not really a prospect, but Raphael Harvey-Pinard. I think
I
he's
love
earned
that
another
guy.
contract here. Man, he's like Gallagher light, but I think he's maybe less rugged, more skillful than Gallagher. He's a faster skater for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think he has as much in him as Gallagher does in terms of dominating play, but his underlying numbers are very, very strong for a player who played on a team that didn't have many people who could push play the right direction. Like when you put him with Nick Suzuki last year, that line matching up against top lines outplayed them, which is wild for a team as bad as the Canadians were with as little defensive structure as they have. So I really want to see Harvey-Pinard with Caufield and Suzuki to start next year. I know
What a line.
it's a small line, but I feel like it's not an easy line to play against, and everyone would be very annoyed by them. And then you have like your big boys in your second line where you can roll out like Doc, Anderson, Slavkovsky, and it's just all guys over 6'3".
Oh my, like
who are
that line would be
physical mean.
horrible. Jeez.
Yeah.
That
So like for a
wow.
team that's pretty bad, that's a pretty decent top six, right? Anderson has his issues, but he's actually grown a lot under Marty St. Louis, which is pretty nice. But there was who's the other prospect I'm thinking of? Jesse Ylonen is the other one for next year, who I'm pretty excited about seeing in the NHL because he kind of started to figure it out towards the end of last season, getting his shots in the right areas, being more confident in his shot, and he has a devastating shot. But
Yeah.
also for him, I think this year's kind of make or break. He's going to be passed by a lot of other prospects on the Canadians relatively soon. I mean, aside from Joshua Waugh and Riley Kidney and a few others coming this year, the year after that, there's going to be Owen Beck and Philip Michar and I think Jared Davidson is going to be in Laval next year as well. So there's a lot of players who are going to be competition for him coming up quickly. So he has a huge amount of motivation that he has to get through because, man, once you start getting passed on the depth chart of a bad team, your NHL career can fizzle out really quick.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much at that point. And I think he's a player who's definitely good enough to be in the NHL, but he's got to show it consistently.
I think that's a very astute observation there, Mr. Berkshire.
Thank you very much.
We've been recording for almost an hour now, and we understand that you have a busy day. So we shall end the podcast with one last question.
Absolutely.
And the plan is with this question is that eventually we'll have 18 answers, and then we'll be able to do something with the answers. So take it away,
Oh,
Roche.
cool.
Okay, well, we know we have to go to lunch, so this is actually a nice transition. So if you had to use a utensil in to replace a hockey stick, so it's like hockey stick sized, what utensil would you pick and why?
Oh, geez. It's got to be like like silverware.
It
Like
can be like a
anything you'd find in the
chopstick,
kitchen.
a pizza slicer if you want, an ice cream scoop.
I'm thinking, what can you get torque off of?
Spatula's our most common answer.
Spatula is a pretty good one. Yeah, because spatula is also, you can get like the curve on the, not like the curve like a hockey stick curve, but it's like beveled at the end.
Yeah.
So you can actually have a hockey stick style pose. I feel like I almost want to say like an offset spatula.
An offset spatula.
Yeah, it's an offset spatula, so that it means like it's got a bend in it as well.
I see, okay.
So you can kind of use the side of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going with, the offset spatula.
So the goal is once we blow up, which is going to happen at some point, I have faith.
Tomorrow. After this episode, everyone's going to see.
I'm going to hope that I can get in contact with Bauer or CCM or Warrior or someone like that, and I'm going to say, listen, I have this idea. I've got 18 guys here who all have these utensils. Can you make them? And then we can hold a hockey game with these utensils.
That sounds amazing.
Let's make it happen.
This is
man.
how we get sued. This is how.
How do we get sued from this?
Like, how do we get TSN to broadcast this game?
Oh, hell yeah. Sportsnet as well. Make this an international. You get some like pro Eric Lindros. Get him to play. Get like him with an oversized fork, moving the puck up the ice.
Radko Gudas is out there using it as a spear.
With an actual spear.
See, that's what I'm thinking. Chopstick, right? You just stab the puck and throw it in the net.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it'd be almost like that scene out of Anchorman with the different
yes, yeah,
different TV stations, but everyone's wrapping a different utensil.
There is something in this idea. You have connections, Andrew. Go and exploit them.
All right, I'll try to get it going. We'll have like some kind of giant frozen lake. We'll do it outdoors and have like 10 nets.
That sounds
anybody can score
perfect.
on anybody.
Yeah, like some sort of hockey battle royale.
Get the money puck on like freeze.
I'm so down for this.
Get Dom Decision with the advanced stats.
Perfect.
This sounds amazing. Right, thank you very much, Andrew, for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. We cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
And if you want to plug yourself, we don't really have many viewers, but feel free.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can check out all my work at sdpn.ca, or you can go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/sdpn, where you can find all of our Game Over content. We have live streaming post-game shows for every Canadian hockey team, or every Canadian NHL team, I should say. Probably going to expand to other markets eventually, but not this particular year. We're focusing on those 7 markets for another year to make sure that they are solid and growing, and it's really fun. Honestly, it's a kind of post-game content you can't get anywhere else, even though a lot of people are starting to copy us 2 years in. But ours is the original and the most fun. So come join us after the games and jump into the stream chat, interact with us. I think that's the best part about it is like the people who watch it live get to become part of the show. Like there's been shows that I've done where I have like the topics written down and somebody brings something up. I'm like, hey, that's better than what I had written down. Let's talk about that for 15 minutes. So it's a fun concept, fun format.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to tuning in next season when it's broadcast. There are no more Canadian teams left in the playoffs, so we won't be able to experience it until October next year.
Actually, we have a show going called Game Over Cup Final, so you can experience it after every game.
I
this
did not know
postseason.
that.
Yeah. Our Game Over hosts from all the markets are like trading off shows, so they get to be on live after every game.
Wow. Well, I shall tune in because I honestly did not know that was going on. All right. Thank you very much, Andrew, for coming on. Thank you for listening to the Lewis and Rozh Hockey Podcast. I've been Lewis.
And I've been Rozh.
And we'll see you next time.